Welcome to our Indie-stry chat. The members of Bloodhound Pix and an occasional guest give their no BS experiences with current aspects of the industry. Hi, thank you for listening to this episode of Indie-stry, where I'm going to change it up a little bit away from the horror genre itself and go off and talk about theater, because a lot of times we like to assume theater is theater, film is film. But there is a lot of crossover, especially what is happening currently with the industry. So I had the pleasure of talking with Dan Johnson, an actor I've known for some time and one of the most passionate and talented actors that I've ever seen. So the conversation with Dan takes a trip down memory lane where we talk about a little bit of how we worked together and what we created and kind of how it was important during that time. We also go in and start talking about race in the theater world and what he and some of the people he's working with intend to do to kind of help bring more inclusion into theater. So listen up and hope you enjoy. So thank you for joining me, Dan.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so before we begin really getting into these topics, can you tell our listeners kind of how you got started in theater, your kind of history, your education that led up to you becoming, a working actor?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, I first started in theater in elementary school because I think a music teacher noticed that it was a way to keep me focused and paying attention to things. I was a very active kid, always wanting to, I guess, get into everything and always wanting to get people's attention somehow. So I started in elementary school, kept doing theater in middle school. I think I did my first professional theater actually in elementary school.
Oh.
I was part of a kids show choir, and we performed in Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat when it toured to Detroit. I met Donny Osmond. That was exciting.
That is. Okay.
So then, went on to it in high school, had a couple more professional experiences in high school, but really started working professionally, consistently, while I was at Eastern Michigan University, which would have been around 2010, 2011, which was also when I met you.
Yes.
And we happened to form a little theater group together.
Yeah, called, all the information on that is still all still online because I think the email address that it's attached to is no longer relevant, so you can't delete it. But yeah, it's called Satire Theater.
It was. What exactly was our particular? I don't remember if we had a mission statement.
So yeah, the mission statement was basically to bring attention to serious subjects using comedy, and that was it in short. But then it was comedy in any form, so it didn't just have to be the satire or slapstick where you could have something more macabre or black comedy, dark comedy, or you could have slapstick. We did that as well, but or surrealism, things like that. It's kind of what the intention was, and then also the harder one to achieve because creatively it worked. But then the harder one to achieve was to build a community and take the outside, those that would be deemed the minority or the outsiders or however you use that phrase, and then be able to give them a voice instead of just the people that were the ones that were always cast in these shows because they were, I guess we can get into that later, or because we will be getting into that a little bit later, I'm assuming, but because they were the good-looking white kids and were just always cast and stuff like that.
Yes, that was not me. I believe at the time I was, what was I? Something like 330 pounds. I was a large guy. But I that idea of touching on serious subjects, involving marginalized or outside perspectives, and doing it in a funny way, however we managed to do it, that was really awesome. And that was like one of my first consistent professional experiences.
Oh.
And, genuinely, in terms of approaching theater from all different aspects, as a writer, but also as an actor, as a director on occasion. And from there, just basically going out into the wider community, first starting in Ypsilanti, Ann Arbor, and then continuing on. So I would say professionally, I've been doing this for about 9 years. Worked in a lot of places in and around Southeast Michigan. Been in a movie. That was kind of cool.
With Jeff, because we were just talking about it, I was going to say Jeff Goldblum, but Jeff Daniels is.
Yeah, I wish Jeff Goldblum.
Yeah.
But yeah, because one of the places I have worked at over the last couple of years has been the theater company that he founded, the Purple Rose Theater Company in Chelsea, Michigan. And he had an idea a couple of years back to film one of the plays that he had written for that theater called Guest Artist. Shot it entirely in Michigan with a predominantly Michigan crew. Every member of the cast, I believe, except one, was, a Michigan actor, an actor from the Purple Rose Theater Company. So, yeah, that was pretty cool.
Yeah, no, that's because he's always kind of done that. I know, it's the silly one, but it started with Escanaba in the Moonlight, and then even though he'll go off and, now he's an Emmy Award winner, but he'll go off and do all these other things, he'll always kind of come back and do something very Michigan related, it seems, every couple of years.
Yeah. Actually, before, theater closed down entirely, my last gig that I got to complete was I was understudying on a new play of his called Road Signs, which was going up the Purple Road. So. Oh,
that's amazing! Yeah.
Yeah, it was actually, the terminology was play with music, but it was actually a musical. So that was kind of, that was fun.
Yeah, no, definitely. So that actually kind of gets into, talking about Michigan and things like that, about, there's always this mentality going on where if you're an actor, you need to, and you're interested in, film or television, you should go to Los Angeles. If you're interested in stage shows, you should go to New York, or you can kind of do Chicago if you're a Midwesterner. But there is so much, there is so much in terms of like these other little pockets throughout the country that I think are often overlooked, where there's a ton of theater. You have the Twin Cities, you have. So what is it like working kind of in these, these pockets, or in this region that isn't associated with, Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, or so on?
And I have a feeling we'll probably touch on a couple of these things later. But overall, it's pretty interesting. I will say right off the bat, whether you happen to be an actor who's a part of Actors Equity Association, the union, or not, you are not doing theater in the state for the financial compensation. I can name one local actor in the area who works at a particular theater all the time and is a part of the union, so gets paid very well, but still works at a grocery store because, they've got a family. Mm-hmm. So you're not doing it for the money. One thing that I will say is cool, at least that I've found, is the variety of work and the ability to work at many different places across the state. I personally kind of pride myself as an actor on trying to work as many different places as possible, because I think that's one of the ways that you can sort of learn and improve, by seeing how different places do things, by seeing what different people in Michigan are working on and their perspectives in terms of what theater is to them. Okay. I think there can be a lot of freedom in terms of the ability to create your own work, or to unite with people in terms of creating work. A lot like what we did with Satire. Yeah. But also, I have written a show, co-written a show, literally about my experiences being an actor in Michigan.
Yeah.
That was the entire point of the show. It was a two-hander with another actor called Luna Alexander, and the theater paid us to do it.
That's great. You know.
So I think that there is that particular freedom. I think that the level of talent, for sure, that felt very Michigan. The level of talent in Michigan, I think that's absolutely comparable to any other place in the country. Certainly I would hold some people working at Michigan Theater up against anybody that I've seen in Chicago, or a theater that I've seen in New York, or, that I've seen in the Twin Cities.
Yeah.
No. So that's another thing that's very exciting. It's just the number of really, really insanely talented people that you might not expect to find in Michigan, but that you nevertheless run into. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. No, I kind of always, because Barbara and I, we lived in LA for a bit, and I remember going to see a couple of shows out there and kind of having that thought, because when you think, Los Angeles or New York or whatever you're going to see, it's going to be like a whole nother ball game. And it was one of those things where I watched the show, and this was supposed to be it was unknown actors, but this professional show, and it's in Los Angeles and at a big theater. And I remember seeing it and kind of feeling like, well, but I've seen better, and for some reason, like, this feels like everybody's fighting to get seen more, so that they can get seen by an agent or a manager, or there's almost like that competition amongst them, instead of like just putting on this show because of the passion. And you can really tell as an audience, even if you don't have the words to kind of explain it. I don't know. There's the difference between just acting for another reason, be it money, fame, whatever, or acting because that is a part of you, because that is, the passion.
Ooh, see, now that personally is something that, as an actor, I respond very negatively to.
Yeah.
I am not about that particular life.
Yeah.
I can respect people who want to do theater, I guess, because they have pretensions of being able to buy a yacht with it. I can certainly understand, and I've worked in a couple of places where you feel this sort of pressure, like, oh, well, if you work here, and then you'll be seen here by these people, and then you'll become famous, and then it's like, no, but are you here for all of that? Because if you're here for all of that, there are easier ways to go about it than doing theater in Michigan.
Yeah.
There are much easier ways. The people that I tend to respond most positively to, and honestly, a lot of the people that I love and would consider very dear friends, are people who have that sort of internal passion for the work that they're creating and for the process.
Yeah.
And for putting it on, the best that they can possibly do in the circumstances and the time in which they have. Which again, that was satire all over.
Yeah, I think what was satire, to kind of go back to that, I think, because how we approached it was almost, I don't know, a lot of people would consider it, and I just call it this way because it's the easiest way to describe to people, is this kind of, what is it, the punk rock mentality, or because we saw, and we would make jokes, and won't point out any names because you work with some of these people sometimes throughout, but we would see these other theater companies that would be making this quote-unquote provocative theater and important theater, and here we were kind of scrounging, writing the script, and then over the course of like 2 days basically learning all of the lines and putting on these shows, and it was just, we're dealing with the same topic, but we weren't trying to say, look how smart we are or anything like that. It was just, let's make let's make a fun show, but also something that, has that message. Yeah. And honestly, because like our goal was to put on a complete, basically, like,
80 to 90-minute show every single month.
Yeah.
Which, on top of being in school and on top of work or whatever, we all were on crack or something.
Yeah.
But, just the process of doing that and having to come up with something and making something work, you get used to viewing the process of doing theater. It sort of removes the sacred frou-frou aspects of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because that's, which I'm thrilled with, because that's honestly not how I tend to approach theater either. I can respect production values. I can respect money, and I get having the luxury of time and having the luxury of 15 weeks of rehearsal or what have you. But I sort of was instilled with the mindset early on of, you're in the room to work, you're in the room to help provide solutions, you're in the room to come up with ideas,
Yeah.
You're in the room and part of a team, which, especially, just starting out, that was hugely important, because then I was able to carry that going forward.
Yeah. No, definitely. Oh, I'm glad, yeah. It's very important. I know. I kind of wish I had some of that spunk in me still, because, now I was able to write, 30-minute shows in a week and whatever, where now feels like it takes forever, and this is what I'm trying to do more.
A career path. See, maybe because part of it is as we get older, it's that idea of it has to be good. We're doing to ourselves what we made fun of when we were younger. Yeah. Because I'll use this example, because I think, like I said earlier, I was reading it back. Necro Fighter. Yes. Which was a play.
It was still one of my favorite shows we put on. I think it was probably the most heartfelt show that we put on, oddly enough.
Bizarrely enough. Well, because the germ of the idea was genuinely the concept of surviving a traumatic experience. Yeah. The framework was sort of a situation, a disaster had happened similarly to September 11th. Mm-hmm. And the psychic toll that took on a firefighter and also his friend, who happened to be a police officer, and what that was doing to him. And this idea that as hard as he tried, there was still someone that he wasn't able to save. Yeah. And how did that manifest in all aspects of his life? Now, it manifested in necrophilia. But it was still, it was sensitive necrophilia. Does that make sense? It was heartfelt necrophilia.
Yeah, there's a Frankenstein element in a weird way.
Yes. And, well, I think at the same time trying to be sort of honest with the idea that this person that he had in his mind and this trauma that he was unable to move past was in a way entirely self-invented. He never knew the person that he was so obsessed over. Yeah. But it was damaging his relationship with the person that he loved. Yeah. Which sounds like a whole lot to try to put into 30 minutes. But we did it.
Yeah. We did it. And then, I still stand by that first episode, definitely, where we decided to, come right out. And I don't know what kind of mindset we had, but, this first one, we're going to make it, and the topic this month is going to be about, man-made disasters, or I couldn't remember, terrorism or something, and it was, and again, it was fun, but we also touched on, that form of PTSD. We touched on xenophobia that was created from it. We touched on, our Islamophobia, or all So
even the framing device that we had, the one thing that we came back to every single month was, we need help. Yeah. Well,
Yeah. I'm assuming most that are listening do not know, but We Need Help was the tie-in part of the show that was about a social work clinic. And so you would have, throughout it, there would be some episode where it almost played like this dark British sitcom in a way, where you have these kind of horrible people that happen to be social workers dealing with a serious subject, and then as you were watching that story play out, then interjected into it are these other, shorts, I guess, what have you.
Mm-hmm. And like, We Need Help sometimes got very, it sometimes went towards the slightly more absurdist end, but that was awesome. But again, rooted in, genuine topics, this idea of people being overwhelmed themselves, yet trying to help overwhelmed people.
Yes.
My father himself is a social worker,
Yeah.
and trying to put that on a stage while at the same time making people laugh. That was pretty cool.
Yeah.
That was genuinely pretty cool.
I agree. Yeah, I think back on a lot, fondly. Changing the subject a little bit, but not fully.
Sure.
Is talking then about how not just ourselves as growing, or, as getting older, or growing, or however we want to phrase it to make us feel a little bit better, is that from when we first did that to now, the industry, not as even just, on the coasts, but as a whole, the industry is changing with, the internet becoming more and more predominant, and, and I know from a kind of more so a film perspective now, because I haven't been involved with theater in a while. So how has that impacted, a place like Michigan, or just in general, being a actor and primarily interested in theater, kind of with this growing, this modernization of, the industry, or...
If I was to get into a frustration that I do have with Michigan theater, I would say that in many ways, the modernization that you're talking about, I think the democratization of it that you're talking about, hasn't really hit here.
Okay.
I'll put a button in that and say that I do think there's a difference between the union equity theaters and the non-equity theaters. But I still think one of the frustrating things for me in Michigan, particularly as a black artist, as a queer artist, is that there is this level of conservatism and exclusion that still goes on.
Yes.
I will say on my end, I have been very fortunate, all things considered, to have had the career that I've had in Michigan, in that I've been able to work fairly consistently.
Yeah.
I think in 2019, I worked on 8 shows altogether.
Oh, wow.
I did 7 shows were completed, and I started work on an 8th. So basically about a play every month and a half or so, which is insanely lucky.
Yes.
And within that also, to a large extent, I've been able to determine the kind of work that I will do. Being a black actor, there's certainly in Michigan theater is this idea that, okay, well, you're black, so we can put you in for any black part in which we're looking for a black person.
Yeah.
Or we can ask you to do things that would be considered degrading or stereotypical or whatnot.
Yeah.
And I've been able to say no to those kinds of things and still be able to work.
Yeah.
Which is something that unfortunately, like a lot of people have not been able to do in this state. And I knew we'd get into it eventually.
Yeah.
But one of the things that in this time now that theater sort of paused, that I have been working on in close relationship with a colleague of mine, Ashley M. Lyle, another black actor, entrepreneur, podcaster in the area, is addressing this issue of systemic racism or racist, theatrical practices.
Yes.
In Michigan, and calling for actual actionable and transformative change. Because it's very exciting to see all of the changes that are happening on the coasts.
Yeah.
Or even in areas like the Twin Cities, or areas like Chicago, in which, you're opening up theater, or you're opening up film to more diversity of perspectives, more diversity of artists, more diversity of administrative staff. From a film standpoint, now you're getting more cinematographers of color.
Yes.
You're getting more producers, writers, directors, composers of color, or LGBT showrunners, and certainly those same sorts of things are happening in the theater world. And it's exciting to see all of those changes on the coasts or in larger quote-unquote regions. But it does get kind of frustrating over time to continue looking at Michigan and not seeing the same thing happen. Now, there are exceptions.
Yeah.
But by and large, Michigan theater as a state has been behind the times. So I'm trying to fix that.
Yeah. No, that was exactly what we were going to get into next on our list. So you wanted to talk more about what you two are doing, and because you have a mission statement behind it, you're working with other kind of theater professionals to really move this forward. Mm-hmm. If you kind of want to, I guess, explain upon that more exactly what you're doing.
Sure. So this came for me personally as a reaction to, the death of George Floyd, the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, all of these people, and noticing a lot of Black Lives Matter posts from Michigan theaters.
Yes.
Or in some cases, seeing nothing at all.
Well, I always, I'm sorry to interrupt you, and
no, go ahead.
Tie it into the horror element of this podcast. And
yes.
I remember a lot of that. I'm going to keep shooting myself in the foot if I ever try and get back into it in that area. But for the longest time, I always viewed it almost as how you would view the white people in Get Out, where they're like, I'd vote for Obama for a third time if I could. Or I have I can't be racist because I have a black friend, or what have you. That's kind of what it always felt like to me, I guess.
Yes, and actually, I'm really glad that you said Get Out, because I can think of at least one theater in particular that I've worked at where I've known Black artists who have gone into this theater and called it the sunken place.
Oh, geez.
Because that's literally how there's this ideal that you have to conform to, and you sort of understand the entire time that you're not really there to be yourself as an artist. You're not really there to tell necessarily a story that might be authentic to your perspective. You're there to basically perform for white people what white people's idea of being a Black person is.
Yes.
To an audience of white audiences who really couldn't care less either way. And you have the option to do that, or you potentially have the option to not work at all.
Yeah.
And so, just going into a theater, and there are actually a couple of theaters around Michigan, similarly to that in varying ways, but then sort of dealing with the fact that, Black people consistently get excluded from stages, or excluded from having their plays considered, or excluded from directing plays. And then to look at all of that, and then to see Black Lives Matters, posts from some of these same theaters, it struck me as ghoulish. Legitimately difficult to deal with, because, again, having worked in some of these places, I can look at a Black Lives Matter post, and I can tell you that as a Black artist, I've never felt that.
Yeah.
So that's when I personally started getting involved in speaking out. From there was a local non-equity theater artistic director who said, I appreciate what you're saying. I understand the importance of what you're saying. I think I would like to do more, and we should do more. Have you considered talking with Ashley Lyle?
Okay.
And we had worked together before, actually, the previous November, December. on a holiday play called Miss Bennet, Christmas at Pemberley.
Okay.
It is a sequel to Pride and Prejudice.
Okay.
It is Pride and Prejudice fan fiction, but it's a lot of fun.
Okay.
And so we talked, and on Ashley's end, although I'm going to apologize in advance if I might be speaking for her, she was talking about her frustration because her particular website and her podcast, Blacken, was all about basically engaging, celebrating, and championing female and female-identifying Black artists in Michigan. And she had not been able to get any significant traction, despite having been at it for over a year.
Yeah.
And so she was similarly really bugged by this sort of performative allyship that she had seen. And so we decided to put our heads together and try to come up with solutions. So we did podcasts, live, basically streaming podcasts, in which we talked to other Black theater professionals about their experiences. We called them Black Actor Conferences. Okay. We wrote a survey that we sent out to Black, Indigenous, people of color, Latinx theater professionals in Michigan, asking them about their experiences and whether they felt that Michigan theater was an equitable, safe place in which to work. And the response overwhelmingly was not really. Or certainly not to the extent that it is for white artists. Yeah. And then ultimately we came up with a statement toward an anti-racist Michigan theater, which was influenced by, a couple of things. I, in particular, is very inspired by the American Repertory Theater Artists of Color Affinity Group and a statement they had made, demanding changes within that particular institution. But basically a tool, a guideline that theaters could look to towards acknowledging the privilege and racism that has occurred in their theaters, areas in which it has occurred, and ways in which they can do better. Now, we're still working on this. Yeah. Ashley and I are actually in the middle of trying to come up with basically a conference that we can present to artistic directors in theaters across all levels, community theater, equity theater, non-equity professional theater. Because that's another thing as well. I'm big on democratizing theater across the board. So why not include community theater in it? Why not include educational theater in it? Particularly when, shockingly, some of the more egregious abuses happen at a community level. Yeah. But just because someone isn't getting paid to do theater doesn't mean that they're not taking their craft as seriously as, a union actor. It doesn't mean that they aren't worthy of the same respect and safety and consideration. So.
Oh, that's amazing. And what is if you could just say it again, what is the because you work on the podcast with her fairly frequently. Yeah. What are they for people that might want to check it out?
Oh, yes. The website is blacken.org. Okay. Yeah, you can, because Ashley, in addition to all of this work, has been doing some amazing stuff just in terms of engaging Black, female, and female-identifying artists in the Michigan theater community, and interviewing them and all of their perspectives and experiences. It's really awesome. She's a great podcaster, and you can find it, were you so inclined. Okay. The survey that we did and the statement that we did.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, that sounds great. So then, kind of still touching on this subject, and of course, what's become my elephant in the room type of topic that I have to bring up now all the time is, we have what's going on with, race and Black Lives Matter, and then on top of that now we have, I guess on top, we have a pandemic that we're dealing with, and then we have, all of these factors which have kind of really impacted the industry where, So in a lot of, I'll talk to other people, when it's more film related, they'll say, well, there's a lot of it, there's no going back to. It's not going back to the days of where all of these movies are going to be in theaters. It's more so like, the big Marvel, DC, whatever, they'll be in theaters, and then everything else would kind of move to online, or do things like The Invisible Man, where it's playing in some small pockets, but then you can get a ticket right when it comes out, type of thing. So what do you think is there a point like that with theater moving for the future with everything that's happened? Are we kind of past that point of no return to what it was prior, and is there a positive to that?
Well, I mean, the caveat to all of this is film as it was, theater as it was, without a vaccine, it's hard for most people to be able to afford right now going back to the way things were. Like you've got, to name a film example, Jurassic World Dominion that's shooting right now.
Yeah.
But that movie, I'm sure, is at least $180 million.
Yes.
And probably going upwards of that now with all the safety precautions that they take and everything like that. So that's not necessarily a sustainable way forward. Again, with theater, there's a production that Equity approves that's going up in Massachusetts of Godspell, because, that speaks to these times.
Yeah.
In which all of the actors are socially distanced and behind, plexiglass partitions and wearing masks. And, that's a thing if you could afford to pay $100 a ticket. But I think a positive to it is the industry having the time, both theater and film, one, to address issues that have been long-standing.
Yes.
Like issues of equity and like issues of inclusion. But two, rethink what the art form can be. One thing that I hope comes out of, COVID, and something that I do think is starting to come out from a theater standpoint, but I certainly hope comes out from a film standpoint, and I think it's starting to, is there's space for smaller work again.
Yeah.
There's not only a space for it, there's a need for it. I think, once again, to come back to one of my big words, there's more democratization.
Yeah.
There's more space, for people who don't necessarily have a $200 million budget, but who have a killer idea, an iPhone and some sound equipment.
Yeah.
And, a couple of good friends in their quarantine circle. Well, now there's a larger possibility for that work to see a wider audience, or to create that work or to share it. Now, from my end, from a theatrical standpoint, again, because I operate from the mindset of I'm not doing it necessarily for the money, is Zoom theater like watching Hamilton live on stage? No, it's not. But what Zoom theater does, again, is have the potential to reach a wider audience.
Yeah.
So what does theater in the Zoom era look like? Well, there are ways to do it. There are ways to do, I actually just went to one recently, socially distanced theater, in which you don't necessarily need to have the actors wearing masks. Now, they are going to be smaller shows, but you can still do them.
Yeah.
There are ways around this, but they're going to require creativity, which I think is exciting, because I think that's our job as people working in artistic professions, is to be creative. I think a lot of the people that you're seeing complain about, film is dying because what about movies like, Tenet, and it's not the same? I respect that. I have huge sympathy for everybody whose, profession is directly affected by COVID. I mean, mine has basically been shut down. From, say, Christopher Nolan's standpoint, he still has the ability to make films if he wants to.
Yeah.
He would just have to go about it in a different way. And I think that's what the moment is requiring. But I happen to think that's optimistic.
I think that's kind of proving to like these different mentalities. It's great that you bring up, somebody like Christopher Nolan, who, there's him versus he had the debate with Soderbergh where, because Soderbergh shoots digitally, and
he literally shoots on iPhones,
yeah, and Nolan was saying, what will it take, or I forgot the phrase, but he's complaining about Soderbergh doing that and saying, like, to bring you back to film. And Soderbergh said, well, do you type on a typewriter? And it's, this idea of that, it is progression and it is, advancement, and we have to, and for arts, there's that thing about you look forward and you go for that, and those are the people that really come out of it, and some great works can maintain. While, yes, you can wish that you're always shooting on 35 millimeter or 70 millimeter, and it's in this huge theater and blah, 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 but that's just not the case.
Well, I think, again, it comes down to this idea. There is a privilege involved in that. Granted, I saw The Hateful Eight on 35 millimeter like everybody else. It was glorious to watch in 35 millimeter. 65 millimeter, or I forget what it was. I'm blanking. I'm a terrible film person.
70?
Yes. Yeah. So I saw it. I did see it, and it was wonderful. But is the idea to sort of fetishize the way in which you produce your art, or is the idea to hopefully create art that has an impact on as many people as possible?
Yeah.
Because I can tell you right now, requiring that your film is shown on IMAX theaters, even pre-COVID, automatically limits the number of theaters that can show it, which automatically limits the number of people who can see it.
Yeah. And the tickets are more, too, and you're...
Right. And the tickets are more, too. Like, going back to this production of Godspell that's happening in Massachusetts. Yeah. It's $100 a ticket. Like, that's a huge ask. Even pre-COVID, $100 is a huge ask for anybody. I have issues working as a theater artist in Michigan, with theaters that charge $43, $45, $48 a ticket.
Yeah.
And so you're basically creating this system where you're producing privileged art for people who have the privilege to be able to watch it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that actually gets into a topic that I think about a lot, and I have not had the opportunity to mention it, so now thank you for allowing me to.
Oh, yeah.
As we're diversifying, which is amazing, I think there's always this conversation that pops up. There'll be an article, they'll mention it, and then it'll disappear, and we'll just kind of forget about it or whatever for a couple of years. Is that on top of diversity, there's also that acknowledgement of, for example, in Los Angeles, they say the ones that really make it forward are, it's not necessarily those that are talented, it's those that have the means to keep going.
Yep.
Where there's the, not putting stereotypes on it, but the people where their parents are willing to pay some of their rent. Where, Los Angeles people are spending over $1,000 for a little bedroom, if that.
Yeah.
So then, you have these other people that may have an extreme amount of talent, but just can't financially afford it without working constantly. And...
Yeah. I mean, I can think right now. I will shout his name out right now because I think he's spectacular. John Stevens. He is a kid I met at the Purple Rose.
Okay.
He was an apprentice there. Black actor, writer. He's in California right now, getting his master's acting degree at the University of Southern California.
Okay. Wow.
But he's there on a full ride scholarship, without which he would not be able to afford to go.
Yeah.
Because otherwise he's a kid from the Twin Cities who couldn't afford it on his own, couldn't afford it with his mom.
Yeah.
It would just be impossible. So, to me, I think anything that we, especially as, people who are a little more established, can do to remove those barriers, I think on all levels. I think in terms of increasing access to art so that more people can see it. I think in terms of increasing access to programs so that more people can be a part of them. I think in terms of increasing access to schooling, in terms of increasing access to internships and apprenticeships, and making sure that people are, of course, treated fairly and compensated fairly. But increasing access. I am all about increasing access for the arts, because I think an art that is for the privileged and an art that is for the people who can afford it is ultimately an art that says nothing to the larger community, and it's an art that's going to kill itself. I mean, I love opera as much as the next person, but opera's in bad shape right now.
No, I'm gonna botch I'm paraphrasing the quote, and I don't even have the person, but I know there's this quote that in order for anything to be considered art, it needs to be accessible by kind of all classes. Mm-hmm. And so that's what, for, I guess, going back to the film portion of it, can it really be considered art until you have, somebody in a low-income home that's able to do it themselves and make it and, really bring into the world the same way, where, you have painters who you can have incredibly wealthy, or, people painting at, any economic level.
Well, and I think part of that as well is this removal of the idea that, it's like we were talking about earlier, the removal of this, the frou-frou-ness involving art, and this idea that, now I'm going to quote Ratatouille, not everyone can be a great artist, but a great artist can come from any place. Yes. And great work can come from anywhere, and can come in many different forms. I mean, you and I both love David Lynch. Yeah. I think you and I have both watched many times his rant about watching movies on iPhones. Yeah. I feel where he's coming from, but how many of us nowadays have watched at least an episode of something on the internet on an iPhone? Yeah. Or an iPad or a similar device?
Well, it's funny you say that, because a lot of the reasoning behind these interviews, what started it, is because of, I'd go and watch, or I even got a chance to do Q&A stuff with David Lynch, and there's other people too, but, they give this idea where it's like, just go out, don't give in at all, just make your idea, and then it'll work. It'll work. But you just got, and I get the sentiment behind it of you just need to go out and make it. Yeah. But there is that kind of, you're speaking as somebody who, you were doing it when, the experimental aspect, when nobody really was at the time. You're now, you're David Lynch. You can, go out and do whatever you want, and Showtime or whatever's going to pick it up. So how do you really explain that to somebody that's just starting out in modern world, and what is that like for anybody else that doesn't already have that name? When I did the grad school portion that we've talked about on this, yes, we had this guy come in to pitch or to teach us about pitching screenplays and whatever, and I won't give his name or anything like that, but one of the things he said, and this was a guy that considered himself a very strong liberal and so on, and he said, well, you're going to have to, the best thing you can do, and it might hurt your pride a little bit, but you should ask your parents if they could help pay for your rent for, at least a year. And I remember thinking, at least even for myself, there's no way. And
I can ask.
Yeah. It's not like it's going to do anything, because my parents can't afford to pay my rent for a year. And this is a guy that talked about, sailing the world and all of that. And it's just, and this is, somebody that considers himself one with the people and one, and so it's just, it's that crazy.
Was this Adam Sandler? Who was this?
He's a television writer. That's all.
Oh, yeah. Lord. Okay. That's fair.
Yeah.
Part of this you have to recognize is that people are old. Yeah. And once people get old, they don't necessarily want to learn things or accept that there are different ways of doing things. No, I mean, that is what I think is interesting about, say, Soderbergh versus Christopher Nolan. Because you're talking about two people who are relatively close in age. Yeah. But one person has shown a much greater willingness to explore what he can do as an artist and what he's trying to say, using literally any material that he has at his disposal. I think that, to me, is ultimately an artist I can understand a little bit better.
Yeah. No, I agree.
I can, even if I don't necessarily appreciate all of their art, I can at least appreciate their mindset much more than someone who prioritizes the perfection of the work.
Yeah.
Or the perfection of the process. And I think to deny that one of the main problems across art on all levels is the fact that there is a financial barrier that keeps so many interesting voices and perspectives and ideas out. I think without addressing that, I think you're not only doing a disservice to those artists, but you're doing a disservice to those art forms.
Yes.
It's elitism. I have no patience for elitism. I have no use for it. And I'm not even asking necessarily for, look, what I absolutely love is be making a living wage working solely as an actor. Yes. Am I trying to work towards that? Yes. In the meantime, am I, working full-time at a hospital and doing theater at night? Yes. Because I care about doing theater. And I do what I need to do in order to do what I love and also put a roof over my head.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. So I guess that's, kind of get on a more easier topic to discuss.
Yes.
So since this is a podcast where we focus on a lot of the, horror movies and obscure and so on, and I know have been greatly inspired, and you're a big fan of the horror genre and the macabre, and we even talked about, within this episode, you're writing a play about, somebody piecing together body parts, and I don't want to give away the play because I'm hoping one day you, write the full version and then can really promote it, but...
Yes, and get more people to walk out.
Yes. So, that is kind of... why was that so inspiring to you, the macabre and the horror and then after that, kind of what we always ask for a film or something that you champion, that may be obscure and you wish more people had their eyes on?
Oh, sure. For me, I love horror for many different reasons, just on a purely fun level, and this was something I learned when doing a production of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Of course satire as well, but I was reminded of it doing Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, because you'd be sort of shocked and surprised how relatively few people consider doing horror in theater.
Yeah.
But do you know how much fun it is to scare people with theater? Oh my God, it's the best. It is the absolute best. There was a scene in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde that involved a character breaking another character's neck. And we did it live on stage through a sort of sound effect sleight of hand.
Okay.
And I broke them behind my back. And the first time that we did that for a preview audience, literally you could see someone jump out of their seat.
Oh.
And everybody else in the audience went, oh! And then one person in the audience yelled out, oh my God, I knew it. That's just fun. That's just fun.
I think people don't realize that with horror theater, it is accomplishable. I think there's always this mentality you need to have the camera tricks, or you need to have the description through prose or something that you can't get, but there are a lot of amazing kind of horror plays that often go overlooked, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And again, it's not, well, because, one of the standard, but honestly one of the truest things about horror, you cannot create any image, you cannot create any sound that's going to be more terrifying than what someone can come up with in their head.
Yes.
You can't do it. But what you can do, just through the power of suggestion, in combination with what you've already primed the audience to be thinking about, you can do so many great things. I guarantee we were able to, like, scare so many people on that show just through things like a paint stick, or the first time I came in as Mr. Hyde, just from the sound of me whistling from the back of the house.
Yeah.
Where everyone knew who was coming, but no one could see me. Like, that in and of itself was just so much fun.
Yeah.
Past that, as we did, I think on several occasions, with satire, I love horror as a means of exploring basically societal issues.
Yeah.
Exploring the trickier aspects of what it means to be a human being. I mean, look at something like Get Out, which is about racism and appropriation. Or look at something like, Alien.
Yeah.
I mean, if we're talking about, like, this idea of sexual horror and the body being taken over, and this idea of, who do you know among you is actually who they say that they are. Who can you trust? What happens in a situation like that? These are all human sociological things that we deal with.
Yeah.
And horror, I think, is a great creative outlet for that on many different levels. And plus, it's just, I think it also, in terms of a creative standpoint, allows more freedom.
Yeah.
Because it's sort of considered like a no man's land,
Yeah.
Like, oh, well, if it's a drama, it has to be like this, and it has to follow this structure. Or if it's a comedy, you've got to have this particular joke land at this particular time, or you have to have this happen here, or have this happen here. Whereas horror feels no need to play necessarily by any kind of those rules.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what do you think? What would you say?
No, I loving everything you're saying. It's interesting to see what I think comes from it now. And it's funny you mentioned Alien, because with everything that's going on in the world, I keep seeing all of these memes pop up, showing the alien crew, and it'll say something about, they should have listened, or look what happened. They should have just listened to these two people. And it talks about, what's his name is it Parker and then Ripley?
Oh, yep.
Like if the crew just listened to them, and followed quarantine, and then none of it would happen. But so it's interesting. I think a lot comes from it, and a lot you can. That's why I personally love it, is you were able to say a lot, and I've always been a big horror fan and my whole life, and that's because I think it also releases that fear that people have, or that you can do it in a safe environment. The world is scary enough as it is, but if I can release some of that, anxiety and fear that I walk around with every day in a, enclosed environment that's either in a theater or in my own home or wherever I'm watching it. That's a beautiful thing in my mind.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. 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 So, in terms of horror movies, I think it's like there are so many that everybody loves and recommend, like all of the standards, like Alien, like Nightmare on Elm Street, like Psycho, like Okay, so the first one, which I think I led you to see, but I happen to love it, and it was an influence on The Exorcist, is Onibaba.
Okay.
Which is it's from 1963, 64, 1963 or 4, by a filmmaker called Kaneto Shindo. Okay. It's a Japanese movie. Basically, it takes place in feudal Japan. It's about two women who trap soldiers who get lost in a field and basically murder them for their weapons to survive and for their equipment, and a man that they run into, and a mask. And it starts off as sort of more of like an everyday horror of existence horror, and then gradually gets freakier and freakier as it goes.
Yeah.
I love it for that. I love it for its cinematography, which I think is so beautiful. Let's see, another one. Oh, Ganja and Hess.
Yes, we did diversity in horror. We've been doing a little bit of that lately too, and I part of the picks, Ganja and Hess was one of my picks. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. And kind of.
It's another one of those movies. Like when I say it's very much of its time, does that make sense?
Yeah.
You know, like it's very much of its time and of its place because it's coming from the standpoint of Black empowerment. Yeah. Like, yeah, we can do this. Like, we can do this, and we can do this just as well. Like, we have all these ideas. Like, you know, traditionally vampires are seen as something that's, you know, quote unquote European, but we can take something that's, you know, European or something that's white, and we can do our own things with it. And we can make it a metaphor for different things. Yeah. And we can still, we can use an art form, and we can use cultural horror that's sort of considered European or white, and we can not necessarily assimilate into it, but we can do our own thing. We can create our own way.
Yeah. Well, and it has, you know, it's one of the few instances where you have, you know, just even in general, a man of color who is...
Dwayne Jones.
Yeah, he's highly educated. He's, you know, it's not like he's playing, especially that came out in the 70s during, you know, all those exploitation films or blaxploitation. You have this man that I can't remember. He's a architect, isn't he, or is he a?
He's an anthropologist.
Yes, anthropologist. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but there's still even that discussion about, you know, if a crime happens in this incredibly white neighborhood that he's in, they're still going to come to him, despite the fact that he's, you know, highly successful, intelligent, you know, and so on.
Well, it's you know, like it's the ending of Night of the Living Dead all over again. Yeah.
Which he's also for those of you that don't know, Dwayne Jones is the protagonist, the main one in Night of the Living Dead as well.
And actually, well, have you guys talked about Carnival of Souls? Because that's another one. Basically, if you've got like weirdo black and white horror movie, I love it.
Okay.
Have you guys talked about that one?
We have not on the show, no.
Okay. Well, Carnival of Souls is another one I happen to love. Well, again, going back to this idea of, you know, democratization and we can do it for ourselves. It's an independent horror movie. It's basically about a woman who plunges off of a bridge into a river, somehow manages to escape, becomes a church organist in Utah, but she keeps getting haunted, and she can't figure out why. And she keeps getting drawn to this, basically a carnival, but she can't figure out why. And so the movie sort of becomes, why is she being haunted after this crash? And, you know, who ultimately are these ghouls that are stalking her? But just because I'm curious. Okay, so literally, it cost $33,000 to make. Mm-hmm. It was shot basically guerrilla filmmaking style by an industrial filmmaker.
Yeah.
You know, so it is very much a do-it-yourself, ragtag, seat-of-your-pants kind of movie. Yeah. And yet, for that, the imagery and the ideas and the just eeriness of that movie.
Yeah.
You know, it's more effective than, I don't know. Like, name any of the sort of modern trend in movies where you've got jump scares left and right, and, you know. And I love that kind of horror.
Yeah.
You know, I love horror that sort of sits in your soul, if that makes sense.
No, it does, exactly.
And then, I don't know. I'll always throw in a plug for Guillermo del Toro, okay. Particularly his Spanish language work. Check it out. Yeah. It's brilliant. Well, Cronos. Have you guys talked about Cronos? Because that's another one.
We talked we briefly mentioned it when we were doing a segment on, if Pan's Labyrinth, Crimson Peak, and Shape of Water could be considered horror movies, in a sense. I don't know. But we briefly talked on it, but we haven't given a full kind of discussion. It was more we just, you know, mentioned it.
Well, I would absolutely recommend that one if anyone hasn't seen it yet. I mean, Cronos is a horror. Like, Cronos is it's another vampire film.
Yeah.
And it is a horror movie, but again, it's dealing with, you know, it's a metaphor for addiction. It's this metaphor for staying alive, but at what price? It's this metaphor for, you know, the influence that modernization and industrialization and, westernization has had on Mexico and Mexico City. This idea of the industrialist and the business person as a vampire in and of themselves.
Yeah.
And also, I just really... the relationship between the central character and his granddaughter, because you've seen it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so the first time he shows back up after everything on the doorstep, and she gives him a towel, I legitimately cried. Guillermo del Toro is, insanely good at moments like that.
Yeah.
So I could keep going on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I recommend those. I recommend all of those. Check those out.
Okay. No, definitely will, yeah. For anybody that hasn't seen them, I would add my stamp of approval as well. Now, I guess the last little bit is, of course, the self-promotion element. So where people can find you online. I know you're talking about the podcast that you'll be a part of. Anything like that, where if you have a website, where can people find what you're going to be doing next?
Don't find me. I don't want to be found. No. Like I said, blaqn.org. If you look at the website, you'll see a lot of Ashley and my anti-racist work. If you search Blaqn on Facebook, you'll find links to all of the podcasts that we have done to this point, including other interviews that we have done on other podcasts discussing anti-racism in Michigan theater. Otherwise, you could, I guess you could find me at Michigan Medicine, where I work, in operating rooms in recovery. I'm terrible at this. I'm so terrible. Well, you know this, Craig. I mean, my least favorite thing is a picture of my face.
Yeah. Which we will be showing for promotion for the episode.
Yes. So, yeah, I would check those out. Check out blaqn.org, blaqn.org. And yeah. Anything or any support that you'd like to send to Ashley and I in our grand and glorious quest to help Michigan theater be less racist and more inclusive and equitable, we'd love to hear it. We'd love to see it.
Oh, and I agree. And, even moving forward, and I would say if surrounding areas or whatever, not even from Michigan, to search you out just to see kind of where your guys' thought process is going and some of the kind of ideas that you have.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from people. We'd love to compare notes, ideas, share all of it. Excellent.
So thank you so much for joining me, Dan. And it was a nice kind of trip down memory lane, but also it was just a great conversation to have on all of these topics. Yeah, thank you for having me. And again, this was awesome, and we need to do satire again or something. Well, we'll see after all this stuff passes through, hopefully.
Bloodhound Pix podcast is produced by Josh Lee, Craig Dram, and Kyle Hintz. Music by Raymond Seed. Audio editing by Kyle Hintz.